Welcome to Fat Chicks on Top. This podcast contains frank discussions about the body, sexuality, and occasionally uses swear words, which may not be appropriate for people under the age of 18. This podcast also uses facts, statistics, and mathematics, which may not be appropriate for liberal arts majors. And this podcast relies on science and reality, which may not be appropriate for evangelicals. Welcome to Fat Chicks on Top. You're back with your host, Auntie Vice, and it's so good to be back with everybody. I am thrilled today. One of my big inspirations in podcasting and sex work, and somebody I recommend consistently in all of my classes, is here. We have Sunny Megatron. She does the American Sex Podcast. She's AVN's Sexpert of the Year. She has done all sorts of TV shows. She ran tours in Chicago of sex districts, all sorts of cool stuff. Welcome to the show.
Oh my goodness, I'm excited. First of all, you gave such a great intro and you weren't even reading any, you just knew, even the old school tour stuff. So thank you. I feel so special.
It's wonderful to be here. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on is you're like a couple of my other favorite guests is that you didn't go to college for this. This was a shift in your career and has come with so much growth. So what got you to shift from your background corporate mom thing into being one of the most open Sexpert BDSM experts out there?
It's a weird, roundabout, looking back story that has all this synergy. And I don't know if I believe in destiny or, but it's a good story. So originally, way back when I first went to college, I was a theater kid. So, I was like, I'm going to get into theater school. Did not get into theater school. Then I was like, I am interested in psychology and sex and all of those things. I'm going to do that. And then I was like, I don't want to be a therapist. I don't want to sit in a room with people. And that's not my thing. So I finally settled on marketing. And the reason was it's like it or not, and I hate it, but we live in a capitalist society. We have to make money. So I'm like, okay, business. All right. And it was a way that I could use my interest in psychology on more of a mass scale. Little did I really realize in my 20s, I'd be using it for evil, but we all got to start somewhere. So I worked at one of the largest ad agencies in the world on huge global brands, Procter & Gamble and Miller Brewing Company and Marlboro, Philip Morris cigarettes and all that stuff. And again, I was like, oh, why? And then 2008 happened. The economy tanked. I got laid off. I was one of those naive people who thought, well, if I work for a company for many, many years, they'll take care of me. Isn't that what it's all about? Not what it's all about. And my interest in sexuality and just being authentic about all of the weird stuff that makes us human never went away. And I was talking to my ex-boss, who's an ex-vice president of the company. And when I worked for her, I was like, oh, you're some important corporate blah, blah, blah. She one day said, F this, quit her job, and started a travel blog. She loved traveling and food, and it was traveling for food. And she goes, now that you're laid off, she goes, you need to start a sex blog. You need to do this. And she's not really somebody that I sat and had these intimate conversations with. She was kind of a friend, but kind of still my boss, and I was like, she's telling me this? I can't talk about my boobs on the internet. What? Lost your, and lo and behold, I sat with that for a while and boom, here I am. And it's weird because it came full circle because the TV show happened. My first love was like, I actually wanted to be on TV. Like I was going to theater school to get into TV, and that didn't work out, but then it mysteriously did anyway. And then, talking about sex and sexuality and psychology, it did anyway. I also can use my marketing because, we're all entrepreneurs. So it's real weird how that turned out.
And were you one of the tried and true, like I was an undergrad psych major, like most of the sex educators were undergrad psych majors, trying to figure out what the fuck was wrong with you, and that's what drove you into it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, so much. Yeah. So I started out taking a lot of psychology. I ended up with a women's study minor, which is now like gender studies. And I figured out that, in my 20s, I was so just lost when it came to how the world worked, how relationships worked, what sexuality was about. And, a lot of it is like my own trauma and my upbringing and all the dysfunction and growing up in the 80s with parents and grandparents that were, boomers, post-World War II folks. And I'm still figuring a lot of it out. I'm 52, and I think I figured out how screwed up we all are just because of the messages that society gives us that are completely off the mark.
And they really, there's so much there to unpack. So in figuring this out and figuring out all of those screwed up messages we get, and we get a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I've noticed, especially when it comes to things like messages around healing the relationship with your body and around sexuality, a lot of people doing the best work are Black or women who are mixed Black and, another race. And part of that is body liberation is rooted in the work of Black women. But why do you think at this point, we're in the 2020s, there's so much flourishing in that community because that work has been accessible to all of us for a long time. We've been able to read it and take classes.
Yeah.
What's the explosion in the Black women's community specifically that allows so much of the top work to be done by them?
I have an interesting perspective because I am mixed race. I have one white parent and one Black parent. So it's like I get to see the cultural differences side to side. And when it comes to folks in the Black community doing this work, intersectionality, societal systems and hierarchy and depression, all of that like big picture structural stuff and the oppression that's tied to it is really center stage for all of this stuff. And when I look at my white family growing up and just in general, white culture, it's very much about the individual, about the self. There isn't that focus on systemic stuff. And it's like, yes, that systemic stuff, rolls inside and affects our individuality, but we're all connected to the larger systems. And that is just something that is inherently more seen and understood and lived every day and talked about in marginalized communities. White women, like let's talk about like just white women as a group when it comes to like the self-work. It's real complicated because one, we haven't been taught to see things systemically. White women also haven't been taught to look at all of their parts in that system. So it's like, yes, white women, like all of us, really, it doesn't matter your identity. We're all, I hate the word victims, but yeah, we're all traumatized in some way, shape, or form by the structural systems in our society, by patriarchy and capitalism and all of those things that, sometimes make some of our eyes like roll back in our heads like, oh God, we're going to talk about patriarchy now. But it's true, So when it comes to especially white women, yes, you definitely targets of all of those things, but also active participators in those things at the same time. And one, it's really hard to face that within yourself, and me included, because I'm mixed race. It's like I got one shoe in each world here. And to understand how those two things can exist at the same time, you can be oppressive and oppressed at the same time. And it's like really big stuff. We sit down and go, well, I just want to accept my fupa. Like, why? How's racism and patriarchy? What's happening? But it is all connected. Yeah.
Where did the journey start to break all that learning apart? Because we all grew up in a culture that's like, as I have a dear friend, she's been on the show, is a fan of saying, I grew up in a homophobic culture, society. Mm-hmm. So we've all been raised and steeped in this. When did yours start breaking down and start teasing that out?
I want to say it was little bits and pieces, so I saw, even looking back to high school and college, women's studies stuff. And I went to a all-girls Catholic high school, which is random, but the nuns were a bunch of like old kind of hippie nuns that were feminist and would take us to protests and do social justice and stuff. So even back then I saw some of it, but it's like, oh man, it's deep. I would say light bulbs really started going off for me probably when I made the transition into sex ed, which has now been 14 years. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So it's like 20. I got laid off in 2008, 9, something like that. And it was like next year or so after that. But I'm still teasing it out. It's so deep. It's so deep. And a lot of folks are like, they hear these conversations and they're like, in one respect, I get it. I see some of these systems and I can see how like, it's just a game of dominoes everywhere, but at the same time, there's that resistance because it's like, yeah, I see it, but like, gods, they have to be in every conversation. They have to be about everything. God, and it's depressing. Do I have to think about it in everything? And even for me, who people are like, you really, what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. I'm still unpacking it. It's so folks that think like, oh, I need to like get it. I just don't get it. It's okay. Like it takes a long time to get it. Maybe we'll never completely get it. And that's part of the process.
Yes, it is. And while you're going through this, on top of it, you were raising a kid. So two.
Yeah.
So how did that, as your light bulbs are going off, how did that change your parenting and the conversations you were having with them?
Ooh, it's like I look back on my parenting, and so my kids now are 27 and 21. And, we went through our times where it's like, you're the worst mom ever. And I was just like, I'm playing the long game here. I'm going to hold out. I know one day you're going to take that back. And they've taken it back. They're like, you're actually a really good mom. Okay, cool. Yeah, you're cool. But I look back and I'm like, oh, there's so many things I fucked up, which is, I think, the nature of the game. Nobody's a perfect parent. But I want to say overall, at times I fucked up and wasn't doing my best or not. To me, not treating children or my children or raising children like I have some sort of ultimate authority or power over their like core being and what they want to do. Like it's a lot of conversations. It's not a lot of because I said so. It's like, hey, let's say I'm punishing or, there's a consequence for something. And it's funny because now I look at like BDSM negotiation and raising kids, almost the same process. It's really fascinating. But it's like, ruling with that parental iron fist that we were taught because I said so. You're grounded if you don't. Blah, 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 blah. It just teaches kids to fear. And it's like, I'm not teaching you anything unless I have a conversation with you about, okay, like, I don't want to be some big, some ogre, but there has to be a consequence for this thing. And this is exactly why. And let's have a conversation about it. And I would rather make sure that you understand why this thing's like was so fucked up and you could have died than just punishing you over it. You know what I mean? And so also, as I'm going through my journey, unpacking like the systemic big picture things, that's always been really important to talk to my kids about. And sure, there's ways to keep things age appropriate and yada, yada. But I think they've grown up into pretty kick-ass kids who really can see the world for, on that macro level, like this is what's really going on here, which awesome.
And you talk about keeping it age appropriate and such. So right now there's this massive moral panic about drag and trans kids and fucking using pronoun, the anti-pronoun law that they're trying to pass in Arkansas and all this bullshit. So as a parent and as somebody who has been very visible in the sex ed and BDSM community, how did you explain that transition to your kids?
The transition to sex ed? Mm-hmm. Slowly and age appropriately. My oldest is 6 years older than my youngest. So of course she knew more, I guess. At first with my younger one, it was like, yes, I teach about sex ed, but again, like age appropriate. So what is that? It's about having healthy relationships. And sure, it's about sex, which she knew sex existed, but in her mind, it was more like fallopian tubes and, that sort of thing. And again, there's no right age to be age appropriate, just like developmentally, and I would see in my own kids, they might come home talking about relationships or talking about, I don't know, random polyamory, let's say, like, oh my God, I learned that somebody has a husband, but they also have a girlfriend. And and we just talk about it like, okay, and not in a like, yeah, so they're having threesomes. No, talking about, the communication, the relationship, it's really easy to be age appropriate. And I can't comprehend sometimes. I can comprehend. I'm not going to say that. I get it. I've been that parent. My first sex talk was like, people think like, oh, it's easy for you. It was so difficult. I wasn't a sex educator yet. And I knew my child was going to have their first sex ed classes. And it's like fifth grade, And I'm like, I know it's going to be a bunch of bullshit. So I need to really sit down and let them know what's going on, And I got some of those like parenting books about like, oh, this is how a baby and blah, 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 blah. And my oldest one was a little kind of sheltered, you know what I mean? And she was like, cool. And I practically had like I was a nervous wreck. I was a nervous wreck. And then, I don't think anyone is listening right now with little ears listening, but if they are, like, don't, first of all, and especially now, because I was like, okay, let me explain to you about sex. And then I was like, oh my God. Oh, also, there's no Santa Claus. I'm like, you can't know. It's ripped off the Band-Aid all at once. Yeah, I was like, oh, that was an interesting conversation. We look back on it and laugh, but it's hard being a parent. I get it. It was weird. It took practice. Now, and even, in the years after that, it got a lot easier, but those first conversations were, I didn't know what to say.
It is a learning process. I don't have my own kids, but I'm an auntie to several. Mm-hmm. And Auntie Vice is actually a family name. I was given that when my besties adopted their son when he was 3, and they wanted somebody to do those talks too. And I remember the first time he was 10 and he asked me what teabagging was. And I didn't know all the parent tricks of like, who'd you hear it from? How are you using it? I did not know that it was a thing in video games, and that's why he knew about it. So I'm sitting there going, well, it happens with somebody very special. And in my back of my head, I'm like, no, it happens with a stripper you pick up at a bar. Like,
right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
it's been so refined.
Yeah. It's so hard to know. Like, I did the same thing where it's like too much information. Like, what's smegma? That was a whole conversation. It was like, well, the foreskin of the penis. And they were like, ew, 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 stop. I was like, but you so it's like kind of gauging that, like, how much do you want me to tell you here? And that was an interesting dance. But I then learned to like take cues from them. Or to even come out and say, like, do you want the long and detailed answer where I'm going to say a lot of body part words that are going to make you feel weird? Or you just want the general cliff notes? Yeah.
No, that's great. Now, on the other end of it, I find nobody prepared me for sex after 40. And it's different. So you've passed the 40 mark, you've passed the 50 mark, which I am eagerly awaiting in a year. So what in the last decade or so, how has sex changed for you?
Oh, gosh. I have kind of come to terms with like my own identity and sexuality. Like it was a thing to unravel. Like I have my kink self and all these different parts of my, I don't know, erotic self. And that I've realized like, yes, I like sex, but I'm not a super like sexual person. I am somewhere on like the ACE spectrum, even though I'm not like sex averse or anything. But it's like, for me, if nobody reminds me about sex, I could just forget about it. Like, oh, that thing, and to me, kink and sex are two very enjoyable things, but they exist separately. Like they're not one and the same to me. So that just unpacking all of that, like what cues is my brain and body telling me about sex and yada, yada. I've also, I've had a bunch of health problems and sensory issues and like neurodivergency that I've been unraveling over the last decade too. So that has a lot to do with all of this. And it's like, yeah, I'm perimenopause, age. Of course, I have some of the physical, like the dryness and it's like, oh God, what's happening? But my orgasms are different. And I don't know if I like that. And I don't know why. I don't know. Like I have some nerve issues going on. I don't like, they become kind of duds. Like I work, and I'm like, yeah. And then it's like, I'm like, it's over. That's been a little weird. But I also am embracing more that sex is a lot more than just the orgasm. It's like, who's to say my quote non-sexual kink isn't also sex? So I don't know. I've been expanding my mind as to what does all this stuff mean anyway? And what normal are we upholding ourselves to? I think we're all fucked up in that respect.
Yeah, I've never met somebody normal when it comes to sex.
Right.
Yeah. No, so you brought up a couple of things I want to kind of unpack a little bit here. You bring up neurodivergence, and we're finally like 5 years ago, even people weren't talking about how that impacts relationships and sex. So for you, how are you seeing it impact your relationship style as well as your sex life, other than just forgetting to have sex unless somebody reminds you?
Yeah. It's really fascinating. And this is something I am still actively unpacking. One, I don't get the like social cues of like I'm hinting, like just be direct with me. Like it is, I feel like it's sex time. Do you feel like it's sex time? Do you want to touch me there? I know that's very unsexy, but I can't, like the nonverbal, like hint, hint, flirt, flirt. Tonight's the night. I don't know what any of that means. And physically, so like my neurodivergence manifests as I have ADHD. And I have something that is nonverbal learning disability that looks a lot like autism in some respects. And who knows, like with no diagnosis is fit. You know what I mean? Exactly. So who the hell knows what it is? So I manifest a lot like autism with a lot of spatial awareness issues. And I have a lot of sensory issues as well. So it's like that oftentimes is seen along with hypermobility and connective tissue issues. So I'm starting to realize like, oh, why does these certain positions hurt? Because my hips are completely like coming out of their, it's like, that's why I can't move my legs after. That's why things hurt. That's why. So that's been an interesting realization. Also, I often wonder if my orgasms are like sometimes too intense, because like I like sex, but it's exhausting. Having like the act of having an orgasm, all of my muscles all over my whole body get so tight. And it is such like I guess it's not even a physical, I think it's like a nerve thing. And I'm not exactly sure what it is. I've realized lately, like the act of having an orgasm is fucking exhausting. And sometimes it's like that cancels out the benefits. So that factors into my choice to have sex or the if I'm in the mood, because I know it's like I have to have the energy to like or it's weird. It's hard to describe. It's like orgasms are the most wonderful thing and they're the most horrendously awful thing all at the same time. It's really weird. So yeah, I mean, that's affected, of course, relationships, because it's like, yeah, it's not just like, oh my God, this is going to be so relaxing for me. It's like, okay, this is also work. I'll have a benefit in the end, but it's also work. And then my hips will come out of joint and things will hurt. And I'll probably get some intense, Charlie horses and weird parts of my body that you don't think should have Charlie horses. Like it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing.
And a lot of folks who have those kind of connective tissue or the autoimmune diseases that go with it, like Ehlers-Danlos, it can be really difficult. And I know you've been seeking help, figuring out what's going on. How have doctors been talking about sex and things like vaginal dryness?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Nothing. Not at all. Nope. Not a peep. Not a word. I mean, luckily, like I don't have questions because this is my realm, but it's funny to me that nobody brings it up. And I, a couple of years ago, had gone into, get my routine blood test. And my doctor, who is a Black woman who I love, but it's still like she's a product of the medical system also at the same time, so it's that like really good and really all existing together, and she's like, your hormones, oh my God, they're all out of whack. Look, it's menopause, it's that time. And that was it. Like that was it. And now that I'm looking at my whole medical history, I think, and shortly thereafter, my periods got all like I have a period maybe once every 3 or 4 months. And I was like, this is it. My test said my hormones were funky. Haven't had a period since. Like she knew she's, the fortune teller. No, just comes back every once in a while. And I'm like, you know what? I don't think this is menopause. I think this is some kind of hormonal imbalance from all the other stuff that's been happening. Cause we're going on 3 years of this, and it's coinciding with a lot of my other symptoms. And it was just like hormones wacky. You're that age, hot flashes. And that was it. Like,
well, and I find when you have a rare disease, because I have a very aggressive form of scleroderma and lupus together.
Okay.
And it took 8 years to get diagnosed, and everything came back to it's your vagina, right? They wanted, like when I was having coughing fits and I knew there was something wrong with my lungs, they insisted on a mammogram before they did a CT scan of my chest, because it's got to be those lady parts.
Oh God.
It's your tits causing you to cough constantly.
Oh my God.
So how is your experience? Because I know you've had a lot of challenges finding any help in getting a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
has it all been just, well, you're that age and must be the...
Absolutely. I have been complaining literally since I was a child. I am 52. And I'm thinking back to, it's probably like 7, 8 years old where I started aggressively like complaining because I realized like the things I'm experiencing in my body now that I talk to other people and I can, my frontal lobe works a lot better than it did when I was a toddler. I'm realizing I'm not like this is not normal. And so I started complaining and it went from, oh, it's growing pains. Like, yeah, your bones are going to hurt. And I'd be like, I don't think this is, no. Okay, fine. So I eventually would just believe them. Like everybody feels this. I must just not be able to take it. I must be overly sensitive, And I had my first kind of serious go to the emergency room, probably a gallbladder attack. They're not sure it resolved itself. And that was my first really big disaster. And it was like you said, I come in, I am doubled over in pain. And I don't go to the doctor. It's like, mixed race woman and the white side of my family, they are Hungarian. They're like, don't go to the doctor. What do you mean you're sick? It's a bone sticking out of your arm. Get back to work. So we don't do doctors. So I came in doubled over in pain and, something's wrong. They treated me horribly. They insisted, they're like, are you pregnant? When was, are you having unprotected sex? When was the last time you shot up? And when was that? And I'm like, what the fuck? So just horrible people. I'm there for a couple hours in the worst pain. I had natural childbirth twice and this rivaled that. It's like nothing I'd ever felt before. And they're like, we have to do a gynecological exam. And I was like, why? I know my body, it's upper quadrants of my abdominal area, not even close. Well, are you sure? They asked me 18 times, are you sure you're not pregnant? Are you sure you're not pregnant? Are you sure you're not pregnant? When did you do drugs? Blah, blah. So they, I argued with them as much as I could and they did the exam. And then they're like, nope, everything looks fine. Then they go to touch my abdomen. They poke and I go, ah, they're like, oh, that's your gallbladder. I'm like, you think we could have done that 2 hours ago? So it's been that for forever. And it's always, oh, you're getting older. You're getting arthritis now. Oh, it's probably perimenopause. Oh, you need to lose weight. Oh, maybe it's anxiety. Oh, maybe it's blah, blah, blah. It's always an excuse. And it's not. Doctors, it's not. If you're listening, it's not. So, yeah.
Yeah, as I've learned, you can lead a doctor towards a diagnosis, but you can't make them think.
Yes. Or you can't make them diagnose you, which is what I'm going through. I finally have doctors that believe me because I've had a few tests that show something really funky. All the tests, it's like, tests say you're fine. You must be fine. You have anxiety. And then I get this test back and they're like, you have a thing only 400 people have been documented in the world to have. Oh my God. And I was like, I told your asses this. And so finally I got my doctor to the point of a couple of doctors. They're like, oh my God, yes, you have, connective tissue, something, maybe EDS or mixed connective tissue disease. Yes, it seems like you have MCAS, which is mast cell activation. It seems like you have the but I can't diagnose you. Why can you not? It's not my realm. It's not my job. You have to see the rheumatologist. The only rheumatologist on my plan is he's a piece of work. No, all the doctors are like, yeah, you have this, but I can't diagnose you. And even if I could, there's no place where you can go. My one doctor's like, I have all these patients coming in with the same thing and I can't help them. And I'm like his therapy session. It's like, my patients, what have you found? Do you have any resources? Can you give me some links? I feel so bad for my patients. And I was like, hi, me, I'm here. Like
can I have my copay back? Like, this is what I charge for a consult. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, it's like a weird satirical dark comedy. You know, like what's happening? Just all of my whole medical experience. It's
and you have so many intersecting identities then that they want to blame part of it on. Well, it's because you're a woman. It's because you're bigger bodied. It's because you're queer, whatever, to not do anything.
Right. And it's like, the trap I see, like so many places in our identity that, us as women experience, we can never be the thing. It's like, you're either like, you're too slutty, you're too conservative, you're too this, it was like, you're too fat. Then I lost weight. You're too skinny. Then I was really active. Oh, you're too active. You're doing the wrong exercises. Then it's like, then I stop. Well, you're not exercising. Well, there is no right answer.
And the worst is when those test results come back and they're like, oh, you're normal. And you feel like you're drowning. And they're just like, hey, looks good out there.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything that can be described for somebody who hasn't been chronically ill without a diagnosis to understand the depth of that anguish when something comes back fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's awful. And, now that I've had a couple things come back, it's now they've changed their tune. They're like, look, we believe you. We know you're going through these symptoms. Like, don't think we're not listening. We believe, and they're really like, sincere, but they're like, well, we can't help you because we don't know what the fuck is happening. And I did have one doctor, the first doctor, this is like in 2018, that I thought was listening to me. And I was like, I came home and I was like, oh, I love this doctor. She believes me. She didn't tell me I was too fat. She didn't tell me I hate anxiety. Like, this is great. I went for a couple of years loving the hell out of her until I moved out of state and I had to get my medical records. And they were like, include the doctor's notes? Oh, yes, include. Why to my face was she nice? But in the notes, it was like, patient is overweight, has anxiety, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, motherfucker, like,
Jesus.
Like, yeah. So I have no trust.
No.
I have no trust. Yeah.
Have you found any tricks for getting doctors to listen? Because I'm continually looking for those too, but
not really. Like, have an obscure test come back weird.
Yeah.
And I think that, a lot of folks say, and I've started doing this, which does help in some respects, is I will make like a one-sheeter when I go to the doctor. And I understand, I'm really trying to put myself look through the doctor's eyes of what their needs are and how, as patients, we can come in and maybe we describe things in a way that like isn't on par with like what they read in the medical textbook. So try to be that like liaison between the different languages and the needs, right? So I have the sheet where it's like, I will have 3 questions, and my 3 questions, and I'll have some more prepared just in case they're talky, but I'll keep it to the 3 most important. My objective for the visit. Here are a list of my new symptoms. Here are a list of like the tests I've had, the things that you would think would be abnormal that came back normal, the things that are abnormal. And then like, all the way at the bottom, if, when I give them the symptoms, I will give them like, these are the symptoms that pertain to your specialty. Mm-hmm. And then at the bottom, I'll have like, here are all of my other symptoms I'm seeing other specialists with. And I'll come in and they'll be like, oh my God, I freaking love your sheets. They are great, but they're not. Yeah, they're cutting to the chase when we get to the appointment instead of having the small talk or him trying to explain something to me that I'm like, basic, I know this, let's move on. But it's still not helping. And I think some folks, and this might be my neurodivergence, like I'm really direct and in touch with what's happening. And I've experienced like this in therapy. I'll go to therapists and they'll be like, wow, like, I think you're fine. I'm like, no, I'm just insightful. I'm not fine. Help me. And I've had so many therapists break up with me because they're like, you don't need me. I'm like, yes, I do. But the doctors are sort of the same way. I think they're interpreting that as anxiety because I'm like, look, here's the symptoms. Here's the this. It's probably not that because I had that test and da-da-da. I just want to get to the bottom of it. That's not anxiety. That's being thorough and direct and efficient with our conversation. And I don't think they know what to make of that.
I think so many of them are trained to think patients, and especially female-bodied patients, are just too stupid to understand any of that. Yeah. I won't see male doctors specifically because of that. I mean, not that the women doctors are that much better because they're from the same system, but so listening to you, and we've had on other people that you and I know in common, Liz Powell and Midge Ebon and stuff. And one of the things that has come up in a lot of the interviews is really good sex educators who can be direct and to the point are also neurodivergent. Do you think there's a connection with neurodivergence and being in touch with your sexuality in the way the rest of us aren't?
I think so. I think so. And I'm trying to I'm still unraveling why. The biggest thing that got me into sex ed, and this is before I realized I was neurodivergent, the only reason I realized I was neurodivergent was after I had kids. My oldest child is like the carbon copy of me, health-wise and neurodivergence-wise, but even more extreme. And so they were like, Mom, something's not, and then they're like, what about you? Because I'm like, I thought she was like every other kid. Every other kid's not like, they're like, no. It's like, oh. But I look back, and one of the reasons I got into sex ed is because I couldn't make sense of my identity, of the feelings I was supposed to be feeling, but I wasn't, of the motions I was supposed to be going through, of the flirting that was supposed to be happening. Like, none of that resonates with me at all. And to me, it was a puzzle to be solved. And again, I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, was a big part of my interest, was figuring this out for me. And it's like, okay, I get it now. And also the connection to the big picture, everything, my identity, it's all measures up against what society tells us we're supposed to be. And society tells us we're supposed to be this stuff because of the system. Without getting to, I know there's some people listening, they're gonna be like, oh God, eyes rolling in our heads. We're going to talk about patriarchy again, but it's true. If you look at our system of capitalism, right? It thrives on exploitation. And how do we get people to comply and to not just, think about if we all realized our full authentic selves and we realized that we had choices in what we were doing. And we realized we could say, all this shit is not real. It's made up. So fuck it all, right? Really, that would lead to the collapse of capitalism. It would lead to the collapse of lots of things that powerful people don't want to collapse. So one of the ways they keep us in control is to keep us ashamed about the parts of our identity that are most precious to us, our gender, our sexuality. That's all so clear now. And I don't know if it's the neurodivergence, because I tend to be more of a logical systems thinker of if this, then that, how does that feed into that? If that happens, then this happens. But yeah. So I got into it because I was parsing that all out for myself, because I think I see in a lot of neurodivergent people, they see through the sham of the system. And for decades of my life, I didn't realize that's what I was seeing and why everything felt like it didn't fit. Once I realized oh, it's the system that's fucked up, I was like, oh my God, it all makes sense. How long? Why did it take me so long to figure that out? Yeah.
And you're like, well, shit, I don't have to put up with this anymore. Right? There's ways to work around it or excise it out, at least from parts of your life, so you have moments where you can be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
If our listeners want to find you, if they want to read your stuff, watch you, hear you, where do they go?
Go to easiest place, sunnymegatron.com, has everything. Or I'm on social media, just at tag Sunny, SUNNY, Megatron. I have a free thing for y'all. I have my kink negotiation mini workbook. Go get it. If you go anywhere on my social media, I have like one of those like all links pages. It's there, pops up, it's everywhere. Just like hunt around with us, like treasure hunt. You don't have to hunt much. You'll find it. And also American Sex Podcast, Open Deeply Podcast, or if you got a Showtime subscription, pull up Sex with Sunny Megatron on demand. Go ahead and watch it. And I got stuff going on all the time. So if you follow my socials, you'll see what I got popping up.
And we'll have all of those links on the show notes for our listeners. Thank you for being on the show. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. And thank you for being here, Sunny.
Thank you so much. I love this conversation. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, this is your host, Auntie Vice. Are you curious of finding other podcasts with a similar sense of humor and topic? You can check out To All the Men I've Tolerated Before, which is one of the most awesome titles out there for a podcast. It covers issues of misogyny, everyday misogyny, dating, period stigma, and all the fun things the rest of us have to deal with when interacting with men. Set your players to check out For All the Men I've Tolerated Before. And thanks for listening to Fat Chicks on Top. And now, a moment of gratitude.
Oh my goodness. I think just what I have right now. You know, it's a lot of us at any given point in our lives can be like, and I can be the same, like, I want to move overseas and buy a house, so I don't have enough money. And how am I going to do this? And I'm having this problem and that problem, and I don't have, and I don't have, and I don't have. And it's like, hi, look at all the things I do have. It may not be perfect, but either is anything. So I just, you know, for everything I have right now, for the connection I have to people, for the roof over my head, for the, you know, family that's in my life, all of those little things that I take for granted and I complain because I don't have the one thing that I want right now. Yeah, I'm thankful for it all.
Texas of the world. Thank you for listening to this episode of Fat Chicks on Top. Please like, subscribe, and review our podcast on whatever platform you listen to it on. If we like your review, we may even read it online. This has been an Auntie Vice production. Producer and host, Rebecca Blanton. Audio production by Sharon Smith. Music by David Manga. And more music by Sharon Smith. For more information about Fat Chicks on Top, please visit our website for all things Fat Chicks at fatchicksontop.com.